Welcome. I'm Floyd Godfrey, and we're going to talk in this video about facilitating meaningful discussions in your small group. And I know that this is where a lot of group leaders will struggle, and maybe even some pastors might struggle to get past the teaching piece and into meaningful engagement and discussion pieces. But I do want to say, it's very difficult to get to meaningful discussions in a small group setting if you don't already have these other pieces in place that we talked about in video 2, 3, and 4. If you don't have confidentiality solid in place and the container's not safe, then you can't get to the next piece, which is transparency. Kids aren't going to open up. They're not going to be transparent. So first you put the safe container in place, then you work towards openness and transparency, and then you start to develop group cohesion. The bonding that occurs in group members and between group members and with you, that would come next. When you have those pieces in place, it's so much easier to move towards meaningful discussions. Discussions that go deeper than just a Sunday school topic, yes and no kinds of discussions. So let's talk about that a little bit. I like to start meaningful discussions oftentimes with a story from my own life that shows some sense of vulnerability. So for example, I might share a story about what it was like for me in high school, or when I had a girlfriend and struggled with how to communicate, or some other topic that might be a bit vulnerable. But remember too, have some caution. This is not my group. This is not your group as an adult that I'm processing my own stuff. It's processing and sharing something that I've been through, how I came out on the other side, that's appropriate for the developmental stage that the teenager's at. So sharing stories is a good way to facilitate and begin the process of meaningful discussions. And also stories from parents, stories from pastors. As long as you have their permission to share that story, that's a really great way of developing a meaningful discussion. Also, know your group members so you can bring up topics. If you've been checking in with them during the week, you've been texting, you've been emailing with parents occasionally, you should know generally what's going on for this student. If you have a confident relationship with them, if they feel confidential with you and respectful, then you'll be able to you'll know what's going on in their lives. We've talked about another aspect of meaningful discussion that I think applies to this video here, and that's getting to know your parents. You want to be the parent's ally. I always encourage parents to email me, to text me during the week if something's come up. I want to know what's going on in their home. I want to know what's going on with the family, especially if the parents have goals for their son or daughter that's in your group. Stay in contact with the parents. Sometimes meaningful discussion will come because there's a topic happening in group, and you already know something that's happened in a certain student's home that directly applies to the topic of the sermon or the topic of the discussion. And you don't have to call a student out to simply start bringing that up, and then just call on them. TJ, tell me what you think about this. And sort of incite some of that conversation because you know they're already dealing with it. Also, this is really important. When you ask questions in group, this is where group leaders slip up the most. It's important to ask open-ended questions. Don't ask closed questions. Usually closed questions are just a yes or a no. So for example, do you ever get mad at your parents when they ground you? Well, that's kind of a yes or no question. Then you'll have a room full of yes or no, and it goes nowhere. Versus an open question, which usually uses a word like how, what, or why. So for example, what goes through your mind when your parents ground you? It's not a yes or no question. It requires a response. So they have to start to tell you what they're thinking about when their parents ground them. And you'll get all kinds of stories that solicit a lot of good conversation. So remember to keep your questions open. Also, as a group leader, don't be afraid of hard questions. So perhaps you have someone in the group and he or she is really struggling to get through whatever they're sharing. Don't be afraid to say or ask, tell us why this is hard for you to talk about. And let them share. Don't cut it off, let them share. Similarly, as a group leader, don't be afraid of emotion. If somebody's telling a story and they're breaking down in tears because it was a really difficult situation or they're upset, let them cry. You don't have to rearrange the conversation or deflect to somebody else or carry on the conversation another way. It's okay to let them cry, and we all can see that he's crying. And it often can generate a lot of good, meaningful discussion. We have JR over here who's really been upset. You can all see he's crying, he's upset. What would it be like, remember it's a what question, not a yes or no question. What would it be like for you if you were in his situation? And then you facilitated more meaningful discussion around that. How would you be feeling if you were JR, who's here crying and upset? Why do you think he might be feeling that way? So again, ask open-ended questions and don't be afraid of the emotion. That's an important consideration. It's also okay as a group leader to admit that sometimes you don't know. So you ask a hard question, the student comes up with a hard response, or they come up with a hard question. And it's okay to give yourself permission as the group leader to say, I'm really not sure about that. Let's pray about this together. Let's talk about this some more. Can I pray about it during the week? Can we come back to this conversation next Sunday? So whatever you need to do, it's okay. You don't have to be the seminary graduate and have a response for every single thing that the kids want to know about or that they question. It's okay to just engage the process of growth. I remember a situation where a young man came to me before group started. And he told me that he was struggling with a very embarrassing problem. And he wanted to talk about it in group, but he did not want to disclose that it was him. And so in an effort to respect him and generate some meaningful discussion, I brought it up as a general topic in the group. Once it came up in the group, I brought it out, and different young men had different things to say about the topic. It went pretty deep and was pretty meaningful. Even though this young man didn't disclose that he was really struggling, he was very participative in the conversation, and all kinds of meaningful discussion came out of that. Remember, as a group leader, if something seems serious enough that you need to report it, you just will. You'll need to talk to the pastor. You'll need to talk to parents in some cases. So don't be afraid to consult on those situations with the pastor, with parents if there's a safety issue. But certainly with the pastor, keep them updated on what's going on in your group. Let them know the kinds of conversations that are coming up. Ask for their guidance. How would they like you to handle certain situations so that they know? Your pastor needs to know what's going on in your student groups. So I hope this has been helpful to you in general discussion about meaningful discussions and how to get the kids to go deeper. Remember, these other aspects are going to be really important foundation. You can't really get to a lot of meaningful discussion if you don't have confidentiality in place, a strong, safe container, if you don't have transparency going on, group openness, and also if you don't have some sense of cohesion, that the group members are connecting with each other and bonding with each other. Then the meaningful discussions will just happen and it'll come very naturally.